What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Pick Swap Media YouTube channel. My name is Sean Barnard. As always, we're about 30 games into the NBA season at this point, and it's time to begin concreting some takeaways here, locking some things in stone, figuring out what we fully can make of the season so far. And I want to kick off this episode by giving my top 5 surprises of the NBA season. So I want to go bit by bit, talk about each thing. I kind of set this up as having a storyline based around a team, and kind of the main storyline within this that I believe is the reason for that team that is either impressed me or is performing below expectations. So excited to dive fully into that. So let's hit that intro and get right into things. All right, so as I mentioned, I have my top 5 surprises of the NBA season. Going to go 5 through 1, breaking down each things. Had a little trouble placing these for which I'm most surprised on, and a couple others that I want to kick off with some honorable mentions. So before I get into the top 5 list, I want to kick things off with a couple honorable mentions here. Number 1, the Houston Rockets, and more so than that, the leap by Alperen Sengun. I've been incredibly impressed with. I like Sengun, have since he came into the NBA, but I didn't realize he had this level of being the motor of a team in the way that he's shown this season. That the way he's truly been the primary decision maker on that Houston team, which has outperformed expectations, even though they've taken a little bit slip in the standings, and we'll see where things go from here. I think Ime Udoka has done a phenomenal job getting that team play together, and I've been very impressed and think it's the right decision having Sengun as the kind of the hub of that offense. I had some real concerns with Jalen Green being that guy. I still think Jalen Green's a very talented basketball player, but it feels like the usage all around has shifted in a positive way in Houston. Sengun's come down to earth a little bit in these past couple games, as of the Rockets as a whole, but very impressed overall with the things going on in Houston, and very excited to see where things go from there with that. Number 2 in my honorable mentions, I'm going to go with Tyrese Maxey taking the leap. I've been a huge Tyrese Maxey guy since he came in the NBA and even before that, but I did not expect him to take this level of leap to stardom, looking like a legitimate number 2 star on an NBA contender like the Sixers. So shout out to Tyrese, and shout out to Joel Embiid for also taking his game to another level this season while winning MVP. Two things I did not see coming from the Sixers side of things. But another honorable mention I do want to shift to, Victor Wembanyama. There was a ton of expectation for this guy. This guy hailed as the next best thing, a player we've never seen before. You can throw whatever phrase in the book you want to, and it was basically applied to Wemby. I like Wembanyama a lot. The Spurs have been bad. That is no surprise. They are a young, growing team. But I guess my biggest takeaway with him is I think a lot of people are going to have this phrased as failure or be underwhelmed. I will say I think Chet Holmgren is for sure the front runner for Rookie of the Year at this point in time. He's the better basketball player than Wemby at this point in each of their basketball careers. That could definitely change over time, and frankly, it's going to be fun to watch. But I guess I just wanted to give my takeaway that the bar has been set so high for Victor Wembanyama that I feel bad for the kid, and he still can't miss television. That is still worth turning on any night-to-night basis. And the Spurs, it won't be this year, but they will find a way to get things right. Two more here. The Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm not sure exactly what to make of them. I guess that my takeaway would be that my finger kind of hovering over the panic button in Cleveland, that I do think Donovan Mitchell will ultimately demand out. I do think it will ultimately be the right move to trade him. I'm not an Evan Mobley guy. I continue to fall further and further off the wagon, that I just don't see him as a guy that impacts winning at a high level. Jared Allen's been very good. Darius Garland's very good. They have some guys. Craig Porter Jr. has been awesome there. They have some guys worth watching. But I think the Cavs are closer to becoming a full mess than shaping themselves into a concerning Eastern Conference contender. And that's a little disappointing based on what led up to this and what the expectations were heading into this year. And the last honorable mention that I have here, the Phoenix Suns experiment looks like it's failing. And this is not something that I'm super surprised about. I believe the super team era should be dead in the NBA, that it is no longer the way to build a successful franchise, that there's too many cooks in the kitchen. You sell your soul for these stars to be able to carry you. And when you're not having a player show up on a regular basis, as the case with Bradley Beal, I understand the injuries, I understand the issues, but the bottom line is he has not been there, and the whole team is worse as a result of it. That when you have so much invested in 3 specific guys, you need each of them there for them to play at a high level. That has not happened, and I don't like any of this blame being thrown on the role players. I think Eric Gordon's been very good. Grayson Allen's played really good. Josh Okogie I like quite a bit. They have talent in Phoenix. It just has not strung together and connected in a way that they need to. I'm curious where things go from here, but if the season ends today, they would not even qualify for the playoffs. So Phoenix has been more of a mess than I expected, and that caps off my honorable mentions here. So get into the full top 5 list. I'm going to kick things off with my top 5 biggest surprises and start with the Oklahoma City Thunder at number 5. 20-9 on the season at the point of recording this. Third in the West in the standings. They rank fifth in the NBA in points per game, ninth in the NBA in pace, sixth in offensive rating, sixth in defensive rating, third in net rating. Opponents ranked 27th in rebounding when playing the Thunder, which I do think is a big deal there. They're also 30th in offensive rebounding against the Thunder, and the Thunder are also first in turnovers forced as a team. Now, I'm a big fan of the Thunder, big fan of what they got going on, a ton of their personnel, but I didn't think that they would be real deal contenders this quickly. I think right now, if you were to pin me down and tell me the biggest threats in the West Conference, the Thunder probably are number one on my list. That yes, the Denver Nuggets still hold that pedestal. There's plenty of other talented teams to recognize and be in that mix. The Timberwolves, obviously a team that's currently sitting first place in the conference as a whole. But I do think the Thunder just check all the boxes that I'm looking for. And to start front and center, it is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. On the season, he is averaging 31.1 points per game, 6.5 assists, 5.8 rebounds, 2.8 steals per game, which is pretty insane there. His rise to stardom should also be no surprise, but it's still happening at a quicker rate than I expected. And to just touch on a couple other guys, Jalen Williams also been phenomenal, a guy that I think gets left out a lot in these conversations, but he's averaging 18.3 points, 3.8 rebounds, 3.7 assists, shooting 42% from three on the season. And then Chet Holmgren, the guy that I believe should be the favorite for Rookie of the Year at this point in time, he's averaging 17.5 points per game, 7.8 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 2.7 blocks. He had 9 blocks in a game the other night, which is just crazy to think about. He's also shooting 37.2% from beyond the three-point arc on 4.2 attempts per game. Chet is a perfect player for today's modern NBA. That he's just a dog. He's just a hooper. He's able to create. He can put the ball on the floor. He can pick and pop. Defensively, he is a monster, whether it is that weak side rim protection, him blocking shots, cleaning up for others' mistake. He's nimble enough to move on the perimeter. He's showing off more of the bag recently when he puts the ball on the floor, gets to his mid-range, little spot up creation, the spin. He's the complete package as a basketball player. And I frankly think the game is going to continue to catch up to Chet. That I think he and Wembanyama to some extent, but I think Chet's a cleaner version of it. He's the archetype of what you need to be a successful big man in today's NBA. And obviously, he's going to gain weight. The body is going to fill out in a way that it isn't right now. But his ability to space the floor, to still rim run, to catch lobs, to block shots, he's everything that you hope for in a big man. He has a bright, bright future, multi-time All-Star, no doubt about it. So a huge piece of the puzzle in Oklahoma City, and a guy that has an incredibly bright future and should be a key part of what the Thunder do. Just to rattle off a couple guys that have impressed me on the Thunder as well. Lou Dort continues to hang around, continues to get better, and shooting the ball with a ton more confidence lately. Cason Wallace, I also love. For me, he's like the perfect 3-and-D role player, a guy that is going to be 15-year NBA vet, just jumping from contender to contender. That's what I see Wallace as, and still obviously his rookie season. He fits right in. I see he's starting to climb in that starting lineup mix, which is very cool. And then Isaiah Joe. Isaiah Joe is exactly who he's always been. He is a real deal shooter, a guy that competes defensively, can put the ball on the floor. He's a hooper. He's a shooter. He's the real deal. And it does crush me to see him doing it with the Oklahoma City Thunder after his time here in Philadelphia. But he is who he always was, and is happy to see him succeeding in it with the Thunder. To move on to number 4 of my surprise across the NBA, I'm going to go with the Memphis Grizzlies here. And kind of my storyline, my underlying tone with this Grizzlies is how important Ja Morant is to this team. Obviously, Ja's a superstar. We've known this. But to see the night and day difference between this team with him and without him on the floor was much more, I guess, stark than I expected. And on the season, the Grizzlies are 10-20. They're 13th in the West at this current moment. They rank 30th in the league in points per game. They're also 30th in offensive rating, 25th in net, 30th in three-point percentage, and 25th in turnovers. That is brutal stuff for a team that I still thought was going to at least just be in the mix when Ja returned. That has not been the case, and they got some real digging to do. But they are 4-0 with Ja. They did just lose a blowout game to the Thunder. To the Nuggets in that one, but Ja did not suit up in this one. In the 4 games that he has played, he's averaging 28.8 points per game, 8.5 assists, 5.3 rebounds. Jaren Jackson Jr. is a guy that I've talked plenty about, and I'm a big Triple J fan. Huge fan of what he brings to the table. A guy that I did believe was kind of that archetype of the modern big man that I speak about, where he is capable of stepping out, shooting threes, a huge shot blocking threat. We know the foul issues have been constantly thrown in his face, but he really underwhelmed me in the stretch without Ja Morant. He really looked like a guy that had too much on his plate, and that was disappointing and something that I'm going to have to reevaluate his kind of long-term outlook for. As far as his stats, he is averaging 21.1 points per game, just 5.7 rebounds, which to me is probably the most glaring weakness. we have to fully address Jaren Jackson Jr. is a bad rebounder, that he's just not capable of being a true center. I think that limits him to being a power forward moving forward. And I will note the injury to Steven Adams is much more significant to this Grizzlies team than has really been given the attention. That was kind of mentioned as kind of a blurb, a passing thing of the Adams injury right before the season started, but he's a huge part of what they do. Steven Adams is one of the best rebounders in the NBA, and then when you have him playing next to Jaren Jackson Jr., that frees up Jackson Jr. to kind of play his game more fluently. When he's asked to play like a center and dominate the boards in a way that he just kind of isn't capable of, it's very evident. And I think we saw a lot of that without John Morant. Jackson Jr.'s block numbers also down a little bit, only 1.6 per game after leading the NBA last season and shooting 31.5% from three on 4.9 attempts per game. It's very clear to me that Jaren Jackson Jr. should be reduced in his role a little bit, that he's not a guy capable of climbing the pecking order in the way that I envisioned or was hopeful for him. And I think that is the unfortunate reality. The pieces fit much cleaner together with John Morant here, and I think Jackson Jr. will ultimately play much better through the rest of the season because of that. But definitely a little frustrating from my perspective, and disappointed that that is the case for Jaren Jackson Jr. And the other big piece of the big three in Memphis is Desmond Bane. On the season, he's averaging 25.1 points per game, 5.2 assists, 4.4 rebounds, shooting 38.3% from three on 9.2 3-point attempts per game. Another guy that is going to very much benefit from Ja being there. Bane didn't look like as glaring of a weakness or as of a guy that has too much on his plate during the stretch without Ja, but I still think he's going to be benefit obviously from Ja's dribble penetration, his ability to drive and dish. Those are things that I think is going to change the game from Memphis's perspective. And Bane, I do think, is another guy that is going to look better when he's not looked at as a number one option. A couple other notable things with this Grizzlies team. Marcus Smart has not played well. I'm hoping that it all fits together. It's pretty much wiped the slate clean and reevaluate now that Ja is on the floor after serving the 25-game suspension. But Marcus Smart averaging just 12.8 points per game, 3.3 turnovers per game, and shooting 29.3% from three. That's just not going to cut it. And frankly, I was very in on this Marcus Smart signing. That in a lot of ways, I think Marcus Smart is who Dylan Brooks thinks he is. So I think it was an upgrade from the Grizzlies' perspective, but it has not looked that way thus far. I do think Smart will turn it around. I do think he will make those Marcus Smart plays, which can change a game and change a playoff series when the opportunity arises. But it is much more of a work in progress than I expected from both those sides, from Smart and the Grizzlies. So we'll see where things work out from here. But I will lock in the Grizzlies as my fourth biggest surprise in the NBA this season. Number three, I have the Milwaukee Bucks here. This is an interesting one because on the surface, you can look at this as a pretty glaring success with the Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo duo that we knew that the NBA world changed in a major way when there was that Dame trade to Milwaukee right before the season. And there has been success. They're 23-8 in the year. They're second in the Eastern Conference. They're second in points per game, second in offensive rating, fifth in three-point percentage. There's a lot to like about the Bucks. There's also a lot not to like. That they are 24th in opponents' points per game. They're 20th in defensive rating. Their identity changed in such a drastic way after making this Dame Lillard deal. Now, obviously, that's going to happen. When you trade for a superstar, your entire identity as a team changes. But I don't think it should be changing as drastically as it has for the Milwaukee Bucks. That when you think about what they have success as a team, when you look at their championship run or all the years in which they've been contending, they're a hard-nosed defensive team. That Giannis is a guy who's won Defensive Player of the Year. Brook Lopez is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate pretty much year in and year out. Chris Middleton, still a very good defender. Marshawn Beauchamp, a great defender. They have guys that can defend on this roster. So to be posting these just poorest defensive numbers, to me, is a significant concern. I don't think Adrian Griffin is a good coach. That I think that's very much Giannis's guy, and he was very in favor of that hire. But I think Adrian Griffin is really looking at this as a team that has enough talent that he can let them figure it out. And I just don't think it is quite that level of team. There are superstar duos and superstar, I guess, studded teams in which that is the case. When you look at a LeBron James led team or things like that, where you allow them to kind of figure things out on their own. I think the leash has been far too long for Adrian Griffin with the Bucks. There's been some messy possessions down the stretch for them, especially in crunch time, in a way that I know Bobby Portis has gotten vocal about within the locker room, situations like that. My panic meter for Milwaukee is much higher than I think a lot of people's is. And the production is still there. If you want to look at Giannis, this season, Giannis is averaging 30.8 points per game, 10.9 rebounds, 5.6 assists, 1.3 steals, 1.2 blocks, shooting 60.6% from the field, 22% from beyond the three-point arc, and just 67.1% from the free throw arc. And quick aside on Giannis, that I saw a nice poll going around on Twitter. Shout out to NBA University, who does some awesome stuff over there. But the question was the best offensive player in the NBA. And basically, the basis of this entire voting was to put this best player that wins up against Jokic and sees who win, and see if there is really anyone close to Jokic. So I think we can all recognize is the best offensive player in the NBA at this point in time, and among the best ever in that conversation. But there was a voting in this poll that came down to Giannis and Joel Embiid for the best offensive player out of those two. They were on one side of the bracket, so it was down to those two to go to the championship. Joel did ultimately win, but it was close for a while, and that kind of struck me that Giannis Antetokounmpo is a great basketball player, but he's not a great offensive player. Like he's a fine basketball player, very well rounded. But if you want to talk about just going and getting a bucket, Giannis is pretty far down on my list. That he's not even cracking the top 10 as far as top offensive players in the NBA. That if I want one player to just go get a bucket, I have plenty of guys I would take well ahead of Giannis. And just to rip off a couple, I don't think you can make an argument about any of these guys being worse than Giannis, that they're just straight up better offensive players than Giannis. And those guys being Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton, Luka Doncic, Anthony Edwards. I can even go deeper, but none of those guys should be. Those guys are just straight up better offensive players than Giannis, and that's fine. Giannis is still a phenomenal player, one of the best in the league, but let's not make him something that he's not. And there's been a lot of that lately. Now, the other piece, his kind of partner in crime in Milwaukee, is obviously Dame Lillard. Had a slow start to his Milwaukee transition, has picked things up of late, and is playing better basketball. On the season, he's averaging 25.7 points per game, 6.9 assists, 4.5 rebounds, shooting 43.5% from the field and 37.5% from beyond the three-point arc. Dame's going to be fine. He is who he is. He's going to hit some big shots and has already this season. Ultimately, their two-man game will basically decide the ceiling of this Bucks team. It has been a little concerning to me that I've seen a lot more fluidity in the Brook Lopez and Damian Lillard two-man game than I have with the Giannis and Dame two-man game. That every time I watch it, like Brook Lopez is a great basketball player. This is not to put things down on him whatsoever. But if you're going to be that guy, you need to figure out how to make this work. And I guess my overall takeaway from my biggest surprise here is the Milwaukee Bucks are much more of a work in progress than I expected them to be. That in our heads, this fit completely. This made sense. This is going to work from the start. And that just has not quite been the case. So I think these coming weeks, and as we inch closer to this playoff run, they're going to be a team to pay attention to, because there's a chance where this completely works, things click, and they're ready for a postseason run. But don't take it off the table that it doesn't, and things look ugly, and they're not able to produce, and they're not good enough on either side of the ball. And specifically that defensive ability, you're going to drop as a team defensively when you add Dame Lillard. He's not a good defender. That's the takeoff you give, that he's such a spectacular offensive player that you take away from the defense and you live with it. But it should not be dropping by the margins that it has thus far. So there are some things that they need to fix. And just to shout out a couple other guys that have stood out and played pretty well this year. As I mentioned, Marjon Beauchamp, love seeing him grow into a rotation player. Jay Crowder is going to be a factor in the playoff rotation. Chris Middleton also still has not looked like himself. I'm curious how much of that is just the pecking order and there not being enough shots go around, and how much of that is just Chris Middleton maybe being past it at this point in his career, that he's had a impressive career as an NBA player. He's far past his prime, and I think that is becoming more and more evident. We know he's dealt with some injuries, so I'm curious what version of Chris Middleton is his peak at this point. The Bucks need to find that out quickly. Malik Beasley also playing very well, and as I mentioned, Brook Lopez, just a terrific fit for this team and so essential what they do offensively, being capable of being real deal 7 feet tall, just a floor spacer on the offensive end, and then a rim protector on the opposite end, which allows Giannis to float around. So I will lock in the Bucks for my number 3. To switch on to my top 2 surprises of the NBA season, number 2, I'm going with the Minnesota Timberwolves here. 23-7 to start the season. That's good for first place in the Western Conference. They also rank 18th in points per game, first in opponents' points per game, first in defensive rating, 5th in net rating, first in opponents' field goal percentage. I was not a believer in this Minnesota Timberwolves team, that I thought it was a mistake to trade for Rudy Gobert, to kind of sell your souls to put together this Twin Towers attacking style with Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert is a guy who historically in his career has come up short in the postseason, has struggled with the Utah Jazz specifically, and that Donovan Mitchell very much had to be a guy to overcome that. That Gobert, while he's a very niche player, that he's elite at the things that he does, but pretty limited in what he can do. And we are seeing the best version of that with Gobert this season, that he's back to his defensive player of the year caliber talent, changing shots, altering shots, blocking shots, just locking guys down defensively. He's averaging 12.9 points, 12.0 rebounds, 2.2 blocks per game, and shooting 62% from the field. And defensively, specifically, where he stood out the most, that he's absolutely changed the game for that team. And that's with a number of pesky defenders around him. Guys like Jaden McDaniels, who's phenomenal, Kyle Anderson, Naz Reid, even these rotation players that do make a real positive addition. But I do have to mention the top two stars on this team, of course. Anthony Edwards has continued to take this progression into true NBA stardom. This season, averaging 25.9 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 5.3 assists, shooting 38.1% from beyond the three-point arc, as well as 1.4 steals per game. I don't think Edwards gets enough credit for being the two-way star that he is. That this is a guy who's a legitimate high-level defender and can guard the best across the entire NBA. That he is more than comfortable being on an island against the most premier scorers in this league. He's just further developed his ability to just create his own shots, create for others. He's just taking the progression in a way that you hope. That this is a guy that was the number one overall pick, a phenomenal talent, no doubts about that. And he just continues down that path in a way that is really cool to watch. And lastly, Karl-Anthony Towns, 21.6 points per game, 9.3 rebounds, 2.9 assists, shooting 41% from three. Karl-Anthony Towns is not a big man that can shoot. He's a shooter that's a big man, that he is more than comfortable staying on the outside. He's absolutely adjusted his game to fit things in with his team, but the Timberwolves are making it happen. They've played far above what I believe their ceiling as a team was heading into this year. I do think that they are figuring things out. I still have my questions in the postseason if Gobert can keep this level of dominance. And another guy that I just want to shout out real quick is Mike Conley, who to me, just the consummate professional, a guy that just, you know what you're getting on night in, night out basis, a true point guard, one of the few surviving in today's league. He's awesome. He's so fun to watch, so careful with the ball, so smart with his decision making. And I love the periods of time during stretches where they just put the ball in Mike Conley's hands and let him be a floor general in the way that he's very much capable of. So there's very few of those still around. It is a bit of a dying breed as we shift into this combo guard era where everyone's so score first and attack and creating for themselves. But the Mike Conleys, the Chris Pauls of the world, those guys that are true floor generals, true point guards, little hat tip, and shout out to Mike Conley, man. One time the highest paid player in the NBA. We'll never forget those moments. And to shift gears and move to my final surprise of the NBA season. Number one, I have the Indiana Pacers, and more specifically, the leap that Tyrese Halliburton has taken. Now, the Pacers have cooled off a little bit on the season at this point. They're 16-14, which is good for 8th place in the Eastern Conference, but they are first in the league in points per game, second in pace, first in offensive rating, 27th in defensive rating, first in field goal percentage, first in assists, and 30th in opponent's field goal percentage. So quite the stark difference between their offensive and defensive production, but they are a team who is can't miss television on a night-to-night basis. And when I get to the basis of things, Tyrese Halliburton has elevated to a level of stardom already that I wasn't sure that he could ever reach. That I am a Tyrese Halliburton guy, big fan of his game as a whole, but I did not think he could be this good. That I think we all were kind of criticizing the Kings when they elected to give up on him and make that deal. But for him to come to Indiana and just flourish in the way that he has, that's something no one could have guessed. That on the season, averaging 24.7 points per game, 12.4 assists, 4.0 rebounds, just 2.7 turnovers per game, which is absurd considering the amount of time he has the ball in his hands, the decision he's making. He had a 20-point, 20 assist, and 0 turnover game the other night. That just does not happen at the NBA level. It just doesn't. And he's the key point for everything they do. And by the way, when we talk about the foul grifting and free throws, all these things, Tyrese Halliburton shooting just 4.1 free throw attempts per game. So he's just getting it in the flow of play. That this is a guy who's so fun to watch, so fast paced, the engine of their entire offense for the best pace in the NBA, the best offensive rating. It all should be attached to Tyrese Halliburton because he is that guy. I was really rooting for them to win the in-season tournament, put that little notch on their belt, but it still shows they're heading in the right direction. I don't ultimately know what the pathway for the Pacers is for here. I do think they hang in the playoff mix this season. I don't think they probably do make a full postseason berth. They strike me as a play-in kind of team that they end in that, 6 to 10 range or 7 to 10 range in the Eastern Conference and kind of have to play themselves into the playoffs, but still a team that in a one-game setting, I'm not counting out against anybody. And Tyrese Halliburton, once again, deserves immense credit for that. Just to shout out a couple other members of the Pacers. Ben Mathurin, love his game. He needs to take a little bit more of a step forward than he has. Have been a little underwhelmed in that. I think he gets a little too tunnel visioned when attacking the basket. If he can develop as a playmaker slightly more than he is at this moment, I think it'd be very beneficial to the Pacers as a team, but still I'm a believer in Mathurin long term. Buddy Hield, truly one of the most elite shooters of our generation, a guy that the combination of volume and efficiency, it's super absurd to watch. And a guy that has continually been in trade rumors and frankly just shouldn't, that the Pacers should have no business looking to move on from Buddy Hield. He's such a perfect match with the way that Tyrese Halliburton plays. They need him for the way that offense plays, and a guy that is just a chucker and an efficient chucker at that. So keep Buddy Hield in a Pacers uniform would be my vote there. Miles Turner, a little bit of a down year from him. He's been good, not great. I think that he's a guy that's pretty essential to what they do, but I don't know. The defensive concerns you have to throw on somebody. And frankly, I think Miles Turner is catching a majority of my blame for that situation. That we've seen him put up these impressive rim numbers, the way that he blocks shots. He's been a guy that's led the NBA in blocks per game before, but it just is not translating this year. A lot of that has to do with the pace and getting up and down the floor. That allows opponents to kind of take advantage of that and get up and down as well, or create easy looks for themselves. But Miles Turner, I would like to see a little more from to close out this season. Obi Toppin, shout out to Obi, that this is a perfect style of play and team for him. Good to see him kind of fully finding his stride at the NBA level. Aaron Naismith, I'm very impressed with what he's turned himself into as a physical defender, a guy that competes, far from the shooter reputation that he had going out of college. He's still going to be a fine shooter and a guy that I think has really carved out a role for himself in the NBA. So shout out to him. And Bruce Brown has not been as impactful as I expected either. I've seen some trade whispers with Bruce Brown in it. Curious if there's any weight to that or if that ultimately comes to fruition. But he is a guy that if this Pacers team is in the hunt, will make a huge difference come playoff time. So Bruce Brown is a guy that I could see going either way, whether it is in the trade conversation or if it is sticking it out in Indiana. As far as my last thoughts here on the Pacers, I don't think they're that far off from being in that contending conversation. I do believe Tyrese Halliburton is that good offensively. He has plenty of defensive concerns of his own, but they're definitely short something. And the guy that I would make the pitch for who they should go all in for is Lauri Markkanen. But I would love to see Lauri on this team, playing with that fast pace, launching threes, getting up and down the floor, a guy that can create off the dribble, a guy that I think is perennially underrated in the NBA conversation for how talented he is. But who knows if they have the, I guess, demand to reach that trade or if it ultimately comes together. But that would be my pick for the Pacers for what the next step for them. Go and get Lauri. Let's make it happen. Let's go for it. You guys are close enough that you should, and they're just a straight up fun team to watch. So appreciate all you guys for tuning into this video. I want to hear your biggest surprises in the comments. So make sure that you're smashing that subscribe button, hitting the like on this video, and drop a comment to let me know what teams have surprised you the most or what you're expecting for the second half of the season that might change. So thank you guys once again. I will talk with you next time right here on Pick Swap Media.